Hello, and thank you again for joining us on the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast with me, Errol Lawson. I'm an author, I'm an entrepreneur, and a minister based in Birmingham in the UK. And my passion is to raise the next generation of leaders from all around the world. And so the podcast is really aimed at giving you the tools, the insights, the wisdom you need to move to your next level or realize your calling in God. Throughout the series of podcast episodes, I'm bringing to you some of the top international, inspirational leaders, influential leaders from all walks of life, whether they are ministers, whether they are authors, they are marketplace leaders, whether they are business owners, business leaders, all to kind of inspire you and encourage you to fulfill your God-given destiny. Please, can I ask you to simply subscribe to the iTunes page and just subscribe to the podcast. And if you're on Android, subscribe to it on Stitcher. And if you want to see the show notes from any of the previous podcasts, go to the website, which is www.errollawson.com/podcast. And you can find out there the favorite books of our interview guests, their show notes, their websites, their contact details. It's all there on the podcast page on www.errollawson.com/podcast. All right, guys, so thanks for listening. Tune in, enjoy the show. I hope you're blessed. And feel free to reach out to myself if you like at errol@errollawson.com. If you want to be a podcast guest or you just want to ask some questions about the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. Okay, welcome back to the podcast, guys, today. And I'm really excited to have you join us today. And with me, I have Bill Easum. Bill Easum has a 30-year track record of growing congregations in 2 denominations. His last church, which he restarted and pastored for 24 years, grew to the largest United Methodist Church in South Texas. His record of evangelization and social justice ministries was acknowledged by Industrial Areas Foundation in New York as one of the finest examples in North America. Bill is also the recipient of the prestigious Donald McGavran Award for Outstanding Church Leadership. The past 20 years, Bill has served as a consultant to congregations and denominations. In 1986, he founded 21st Century Strategies, which in 2000 became Easum, Bandy and Associates, EBA, when he merged with Tom Bandy. In 2008, Bill Easum and Bill Tenney Britton reformed 21st Century Strategies Incorporated. Together, the 2 bills serve the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Ghana, and South Africa. He's personally worked in over 700 congregations, some of which are the largest in the nation, and has taught hundreds of thousands of leaders. He's a regular contributor to Religious Products News and Net Results magazine, and the author of numerous best-selling books such as Church Growth Handbook, How to Reach Baby Boomers, Dancing with Dinosaurs, Sacred Cows, Make Gourmet Burgers, The Complete Ministry Audit, Growing Spiritual Redwoods, Leadership on the Other Side, Unfreezing Moves, Put on Your Own Oxygen Mask First, Under the Radar, The Nomadic Church, Go Big, Leading Your Church to Explosive Growth, and Go Big with Small Groups. There are so many books that Bill has written and contributed to. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Bill. Your biography is illustrious, to say the very least. Please, Bill, fill in any gaps there. If I've left anything out, please take a moment to fill in any gaps and give us a glimpse into your world, what you're up to right now.
It's good to be with you, Errol. Probably the only thing that hadn't been said, I'm 76 now, and still working with churches, doing a lot of coaching online and on the phone, and that's pretty much how I spend my time.
I know you're doing a lot of stuff, working in a lot of different churches in different parts of the world. Just be keen to know, Bill, how did you get into ministry? Like, you've been pastoring for a number of years. How did you become a pastor? How did you get into ministry? What's your story there?
I became a Christian at the age of 16, started preaching at the age of 17, had my first church at the age of 20, and had a real bad experience. Church grew the whole time I was there, but I had problems with race issues. Church was fairly bigoted at the time. So I left church and went to law school, and like Jonah and the whale, finally got swallowed up. And a Methodist preacher got a hold of me and said I needed to be a preacher. And I said, well, that's what God called me to do, but I'm not willing to work with bigoted people. So he connected me with, I read some Wesley and love with Methodists. And then I found out they weren't very Methodist and didn't know John Wesley. But I had a great run with the United Methodist Church, enjoyed every bit of it. But, the not growing up in the church, being an alcoholic at the age of 16, gave me quite an insight into the world of unchurched people. I know how to talk to them. I've been where they are. And so far, it's been a great journey,
It's a relatively young age that you got into ministry there. So 16, 17, 18. You're pastoring at age 18?
20.
Age 20. Do you think that's something that should young people begin the same opportunities today as then? Is it rational? Is it reasonable to think so?
Yeah, well, we're going to be losing a lot of young people. My first church was a Baptist church, and you don't have to go to seminary to be a Baptist pastor. And the local church does the ordaining, so didn't have to jump through any hoops. Like if I joined the Methodist church, I'd had to wait till I got through seminary. And I'd virtually be 26, 27 years of age time I got out. But, I started preaching at 17 on the street corners in mission home houses and flop houses, and every now and then a Baptist church would invite me to preach. I did youth evangelist revivals. But when I got a chance to pastor, I jumped at it.
Where did the passion come from, Bill?
To enter seminary, and it gave me a practical framework in which to do theology. So I was actually working with people as a pastor while studying theoretically to be a pastor. So it wasn't all theory.
Okay.
It was not textbooks. I was able to apply it during the week when I'd go back to the church, and had a great time. Enjoyed it.
So what was the source of your passion back then? Because obviously you're a young guy, and there's lots of things that young guys can be doing at that time in their life. Where did your passion come from?
It came from the conversion experience. I didn't have any direction prior to that. Didn't get any guidance much at all from my parents. And it's just an overwhelming desire for other people to have the same experience.
Awesome.
Be free from the demons and everything else that, unchurched people deal with every day.
Awesome. The passion of the saving grace of God. You're now a consultant mostly, and you're working with different churches around the world. How did you go from being a church pastor and church leader to becoming a consultant or doing what you're doing today?
The church that I restarted in 69 grew from 19 people to over 2,000. And in the process, all the churches around me of my tribe were declining. And so they would call and ask what we were doing. And over a period of time, we became a teaching church where we brought pastors and lay people into the church to spend 4 or 5 days, to talk with our staff, to spend some time with the lay leaders of our church. And we did this for several years. And then in the mid to late 80s, it became clear to me that I could make a greater contribution to the kingdom by helping other churches grow than by staying in one place and pastoring a church. And each year the call to consulting became greater. The more people we helped, the more the call became. Between 86 and 1990, I had dozens of churches that came in, and then all of a sudden they started inviting me to come to their church to talk to their lay people so that the lay people wouldn't think the pastors were crazy when they would talk about contemporary worship or small groups or whatever. So I did the rounds conference, but in 1990, I told what God was calling, and that they could, by allowing me to be responsible only for preaching and be free the rest of the week to travel, consult with churches. And they said, we'll see you as a missionary to our denomination. And so they cut me loose. I was there on Sundays I'd meet with my staff on Mondays, and then Tuesday morning I was on a plane somewhere, 200 days a year. It was nonstop until 1993, when it became clear again to my wife and to me that I couldn't continue to do both. And by then, I was totally hooked on the call to be a consultant. I mean, it's like, how can you go back to the farm after you've seen Perry? So my wife and I gathered up our belongings, and we began what turned out to be a very fruitful journey. We only had maybe 3 months of work when I left the church, with a very good salary and a very beautiful home. Within 6-7 weeks, I was booked for a year and a half. It was incredible. I was just like, well, this is what I was, supposed to do. And I have never regretted it. I've never looked back. My wife, before she passed, felt the same way. Extremely supportive. When I said to her, I think this is what I've got to do. I don't know if we'll be able to support ourselves or not. She said, doesn't matter. If that's what you're called to do, it'll work out.
Was that a conventional thing to do, Bill? Was there resistance from within the community for you stepping out and leaving the church? I mean,
no, because I'd been there 24 years.
Okay, so you'd served your time in one sense.
Yeah, and
I'd earned your stripes.
I'd been gone so many days a year that nothing depended on me other than the pulpit. And we had 5 services a week, and I only did 2 of them. So they were very, very
right.
And it was for me. It was a very smooth transition.
Okay.
For people that I had long-term relationships with, it was difficult for them, but they understood why it was happening, and it all worked out for the best.
I think the lesson I'm hearing here, guys, is just there's seasons. There are different seasons that God brings us to in our leadership journey, and if Bill, for example, if I imagine, Bill, you stayed there too long and you didn't leave in that season, it could have been detrimental to the church and to your own self and to your calling and to your ministry. But it took wisdom, I imagine, and great counsel around you to know the right time to move on from that place.
Yeah, too much of a good thing usually doesn't turn out good. And I could have stayed there. Church was still growing, because I told them the first night we met to restart it. I said, first year we don't grow, I'm gone. So
wow.
It was, it was still growing, but I would never have been able to affect as many lives there as I've done over the last, since 1990, really. I left the church in 93, but for all practical purposes, 1990 was the start.
So has there been a significant turning point or like an epiphany or light bulb moment that you've had that was a turning point in your leadership journey?
Yeah, I restarted that church. My vision was a church where every member was involved in ministry. But I made the mistake of listening to my leaders too much. And all my leaders knew was what they'd seen in other churches. And that was the pastor killing himself by doing all the ministry.
Right.
So after 8 or 9 years at that church, the only way it was growing, and the only reason it was growing, is that we kept adding staff. We'd add staff, the church would grow. But it didn't get the leaders into ministry. So I reached a point where I went to my personnel committee and I said, guys, I'm resigning. I can't, I'm just stressed out. My vision is the vision God has given me isn't working, and I got to go. Well, the personnel committee didn't accept my resignation. Instead, they put me in the hospital for a checkup. And one night while I was in the hospital, 3 members of the finance committee came to see me because they needed to make a decision. They didn't want to make it without me. And my wife was there, and she looked at them and she said, you know the story of the cat, 9 tails that Jesus took in the temple? She said, you either get out of here or I'm going to use it on you. Well, that was kind of the final straw. It was so clear, that my wife hadn't intervened. I would have probably worked with them and we'd have gotten through it. But as a result, I took the summer off. Spent the whole summer away from church, got my head straight, came back and said to the personnel committee, I know how to stay here forever. And they said, how? And I said, well, I want to develop a church where every 10 people have a pastor.
Okay.
And they looked at me like, oh my goodness, he really did go off the deep end. We can't afford that. And that's what they said. We can't afford that. And I said, yeah, you can. We need to develop lay pastors who are going to facilitate small groups. And we're going to have 10 people in a small group, and that leader will be their pastor, and I'll be their supervisor, and that'll work. And sure enough, when I came back to church, we worked that through, and out of that was the birth of a book I'd been working on for a long time called Sacred Cows Make Gourmet Burgers. And small group system took off. The church doubled over the next 2 or 3 years, and the rest is history.
Wow.
And the lesson I learned is listen to your call, not your people.
Right.
And if you're healthy, you'll never be disappointed.
Amen to that. Health is our priority, right?
Yes.
But listen to your call and not the people.
And I don't say that literally. You know, I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You got to hear what God's saying first and foremost.
I tell pastors, the church should not set the agenda. God should. God speaks through you, and so you should set the agenda. And if you're not setting it, they'll work you to death. I don't believe in working more than 50 hours a week when I was pastoring. If you are, there's something wrong.
What's your biggest challenge, and what's been your biggest challenge in your leadership journey so far?
I guess when I became a United Methodist and discovered that Methodists weren't united and they weren't Methodist, that was a real shocker, and it became a big challenge because the system itself was dysfunctional, and to some degree still is. So to me, the greatest challenge I've ever faced was how do I do effective, innovative ministry in a denomination that's totally in the 1950s. 10 years I fought the system to the point that I was looked upon as a maverick. And the reason I fought it rather than leave it is because its message is so powerful. John Wesley was an incredible human being with an incredible call and gift. Well, you're in England. You know what happened as a result of his work in England. It changed the face of the landscape. But my system had become so diluted due to the rise of so much bureaucracy. There are bureaucrats under every rock. And the system had so many checks and balances that it took months to get anything done. You just go on and on and on. The system was so dysfunctional that by law, my church had to have 360 people on the board.
What?
Yes. And about 15 different committees with 6 layers of committees you had to go through to get a decision on anything important. I mean, the church is growing, but only because I became a good politician and worked around, and lobbied and lobbied and lobbied. And Bill Cornelius, the pastor of Church Unlimited here in Corpus, he and I wrote a book together in which we chronicled. It took him about 30 minutes to get an important thing done, and it took me about 3 months.
Wow.
And that was the difference in his 10,000 in worship and my 2,000. And just think about it, that was the greatest challenge. Finally, an event happened that changed all that. About a fourth of my church went bankrupt during the 1980 Texas oil bust. And we found ourselves with a $200,000-$300,000 shortfall against a $750,000 budget. My staff and I got our heads together and came up with a plan, and we took the plan to the board, all these people, and here's what we said: we'll underwrite the deficit if the church will eliminate all committees and give us total control of decisions. Well, you could hear a pin, but they bought it. So when we went from 360 people on a board to the staff making all the decisions that were made. 18 months later, we were not only solvent, we had money in the bank, we'd grown over 50%, and more people were in ministry than ever before. And we learned several big lessons from this. The fewer people on committees or board, the faster a church could grow. Second, people have only so much time to give the church. And if you release them from dumb committee work, guess what? They'll serve gladly in a place where it makes a difference. Third thing we learned was problems are nothing more than opportunities to make big changes. Something a lot of people don't understand. Fourth, a few years later, my denomination saw what happened to us, changed its law so that a church could organize almost any way it wanted to. And then finally, the thing I learned, the system may hamper growth, but it can never be blamed for anything. So that was a real major turning point, not only for me, but for my denomination.
That's powerful. And you achieved a lot of things up to now. You've made a lot of impact. I wonder, how do you define success now at this stage in your journey?
5 years ago, I would have answered it differently. But today, I define success for a church by the number of people it sends out or gives away. Not just, but by how many people does it give away to start new churches, or does it send out to do servant evangelism? I remember having dinner with Wayne Cadero. I don't know if you know Wayne.
I've heard of him, yeah.
Okay. I was having dinner with him years ago. They were running 1,800 at the time, or 2,000. They were small compared to what they are now. And he told me that they just put a moratorium on planting churches. Well, if you know anything about Errol, his whole life revolves around planting churches. So I asked him why, and he said, because we've given all our leaders away to plant new churches. And he said, we're in a holding pattern until we develop more leaders. That's an example of success. He ran out of leaders because he's planting so many churches. Now, if I define success for a person, I define it by how many people they affect with the gospel. And that would be how I define my success. How many people have I helped spread, infect, whatever, go viral with the good news?
Amen. I love that the success of a church is not how big it gets necessarily, but how many people it gives away to support, to plant other churches. You know, they say that success, and habits and success go together. What have been your key habits that have contributed to your success?
And I don't have many good ones. But I think the greatest one is the number of books I used to read every year.
Okay.
It wasn't unusual for me to read 350 to 400 books a year. And those books opened up a whole new world of possibilities for me, because most of those books were not theological or spiritual or books that were going to help me write my sermon. They were mostly secular, with a bent toward leadership. Because at the time, the only person I could really find writing about leadership was, he was the guy that started Enjoy, Maxwell.
John Maxwell.
He was about the only one I could find at that time was writing on leadership. So I would look for books, secular books written with a bent toward leadership. And if I could find those that were written from a Christian perspective, that was even better. That helped me because one of the mistakes I made early on, I didn't miss the pulpit for 8 years. My first 8 years, I was there 52 Sundays a year. I didn't get to go out and see other churches, and there weren't a lot of consultants around. So those books helped define my leadership. And the second habit, I think, that's contributed to my success is my willingness to learn from people who are more successful than I am. Who you surround yourself with is very important.
Awesome. So leaders are readers, and readers are leaders, I guess. It's a key habit, guys. So you know that John Maxwell also that said that success is hidden in your daily routine. What does the first 90 minutes of your day look like?
Now you've asked a question that's going to show you my belly. I am one of the most disorganized and unsystematic people you'll ever meet. I can't answer that question because I've always let the situation or how I felt determine what I did. For the last 25 years, the first 90 minutes of my day were either driving to an airport or getting on a plane.
Right.
I have to confess, I never could do what Wesley did, spend 4 hours a day praying before he did anything. And I know that runs against what most great leaders might say, but one of my greatest weaknesses is I'm just disorganized. And 3 years ago, first 90 minutes of my day, I went to the gym. Now I don't go. I did. Of all the questions you've asked, that's really the hardest one for me to answer.
So, but in saying that you've been disorganized, I mean, someone that's disorganized and manages to build a church of over 2,000, reaching different people on different continents around the world, you must have found some way to compensate for that weakness.
Called Jethro.
Who, sorry?
Jethro.
Okay, tell us, expatiate on that if you will.
One of the things about Scripture that just blows my mind is that Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt into the wilderness with absolutely no plan or idea how to get to Canaan. He had no idea how to cross the Red Sea. He had no idea how to organize the people to get them there, to get them to Canaan. But Jethro did. And Moses was smart enough to listen to someone who was ahead of him. So I always tried to bring people in who had organizational skills. But here's about that is, even though I'm totally disorganized, I can something work. But don't ask.
Right.
You know, so, but if you could see my desk right now, you see the floor, there's hardly a place where there isn't a piece of paper or a book. It drove my wife crazy because, you know, you tell you where her socks were, where her shorts were, you know. You ask me where they are, I don't know, they're somewhere in my bedroom. So that's a good question, but on paper.
It's a great thing, you know. I think so many of us can relate to that as leaders. Oftentimes we're thinking about so many different things and we're people of vision and this skill that I'm hearing there, because to achieve what you've achieved, and the Jethro principles obviously come into effect, is that ability, guys, to be able to get people around us, not to be intimidated by people who are more gifted than us, more talented than us in certain areas, and having the humility and the courage and the leadership ability to be able to bring them on team and have them to work alongside us and help us so that we can do what we do best of all.
Yeah, I was one of the churches to have an executive pastor. I could do it, but it wasn't my strength, and I didn't want to do it. So I found my first one. I got out of Kentucky, and he became a better preacher than I was real quick. And then my second executive pastor came out of Virginia, and he's now pastoring a church larger than mine was.
So what is your strength then, would you say?
Curiosity.
Okay.
I want to know why things work and don't work. I love to try new things and see if they work. I don't mind failure. I think failure is the gateway to success. You know, IBM is one of my great teachers. Most of the things that they discover come out of mistakes. Same way with R&D in medical profession. And the more curious you are, the more questions you ask, the more mistakes you will make, but the more you'll learn. So, I always told my staff, I'm going to pay you based on the number of mistakes you make. Make all the mistakes, just learn from them and be able to tell others what you learned. Obviously, we're not talking about moral mistakes, but so often people won't try things because they're afraid of failure.
Was there anything that was holding you back from going into leadership?
I'm one of those people that's not a natural born leader. The only reason I'm a leader is I became a Christian with a call, and kicking and screaming, I developed the tools. I'd rather go fishing and forget all this. So I guess I'd say that's what, all I wanted to do at the time was play golf. I was going to be a professional golfer. But all I wanted to do is play golf and drink when I was 16. And you'd find me on the golf course every day and all day, Saturday and Sunday. By Sunday night, I'd be... So, I was a pretty sorry person, I think. But the word selfish is what was holding me back. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I could care less about anybody else, including my parents. Yeah, selfish. I just wanted to play golf.
And that's so real. When there's a call of God in our lives, that it's not about us. And even for Christians, even someone who's a Christian walking with the Lord, and you've known the Lord for years, and God could be calling us or calling you to something greater, something different, or because you've become so attached emotionally, physically to something you're currently doing or working on, that can become about self. it can become about building our own kingdom or building our own little thing that God's saying, actually, I need you to let go of that and surrender that to me so I can take you to where you're supposed to be. I think a lot of people can probably do that. Was there any mentors in your life in your younger years? Or do you still have mentors?
I had a 12th grade social studies teacher, Mr. Mcneal, who turned me in from a D- student to an A+ student in one semester.
How?
Just by showing interest in me. I've never had a teacher to show any interest in me because I was dyslexic and nobody knew what dyslexic was then. And I didn't find out about it until I was in seminary. But if you're dyslexic, you don't play by the same rules as other people. You don't read the same way. You don't think the same way. And for some reason or other, he took an interest in me. And just at the right time, I just become a Christian and I was just beginning to find my way. Later, Lyle Schaller probably be the second most person in my life. He came to my church and I invited him to come to whether he thought I could stay until I retired. And I remember him saying, stay here as long as you want to, as long as you talk to people on a regular basis. I still remember that. And then in the mid-'80s, he came to the church. Before he left, he suggested that I do a seminar or two. He said, I'll be glad to help you set them up. And those three people were just really pivotal in my life as far as mentors. Now, I'm in a reverse mentoring situation with the Bill Cornelius here in Corpus, who I think you're going to maybe interview. I have learned probably more from him than me.
What's the best piece of advice you've received from those guys?
Well, both Schaller and Callahan said that I be a consultant. And they said it at different times in my life. Ken Callahan said it first. Lyle Schaller said it in the 1990s, early 1990s, at an event with Leadership Network somewhere, forget where it was held. And he said to me, I'm going to be retiring soon, and you need to take over the mantle from me. That God's call should be confirmed in some ways by other people, and both Schaller and Callahan did that.
Key people, man. Some great advice. What is it that you're most fired up about right now, Bill?
Oh, my coach.
Okay. How do you do that? What's the structure around that? How does it work?
Well, we do it on the phone and through a website. Got a website called Next Level Coaching Network. And the coaching has two aspects to it. One is the evaluation of the pastor and where are the barriers in the pastor to the church growing, in the pastoral behavior. And then the other one is where are the barriers in the local church? So we do an audit of the local church. And then I put together what's called a personal mission mandate, where it says, here's the things you got to do, here are the things you should do, here are the things you can do if you have time, and here are the things you should never do. And then we went through that, and from then on, the coaching is all over the map. But I'm excited about it because I'm seeing, right now I got about 10 church planters I'm coaching, with some other folks too, but there are about 10 of them are planters. And that's the most fun I've ever had, because these are guys that don't have all the and know it, and they're eager to learn, and none of them ever say, well, we've never done it that way before. That's refreshing. Being a consultant, you hear that a lot. So, but at my age, I can coach. I'm not traveling near as much as I did even last year. My two partners are picking up most of the travel, but the coaching has just been really, exciting. We do a monthly phone call, all the emails they want. If they need more than a monthly phone call, they can have it. And I've got those that I'm coaching got access to all the resources that we've ever produced free, which is $10,000, $12,000 worth of stuff. It's the best deal on the planet for them and for me also, because I get to stay home and I get to watch people grow, and that's exciting.
Fantastic, man. And is there a book or resource that you'd recommend to our leaders?
I'm going to recommend two, because, I'm kind of biased. One of my books, just the last one, Effective Staffing for Vital Churches, I think is a key book, because staffing is the most important thing a pastor will do. And as the staff goes, so goes the church. So to me, staffing is the make or break of taking a church beyond 150 or 200. The other book, not mine, that I'd recommend is Missional Renaissance by Reggie Mcneal. That's just incredible. It gives you a new scorecard for personal growth. And the new measurement is on what people do when they leave the institutional church. And that's part of that success is measured by how many people you send out. It's a marvelous book. It's one of the earlier books on the missional movements that are going on in the country. And a lot of them are coming out of your world, your country.
Okay. Missional Renaissance. Okay, we'll check that out, man. Bill, lastly, is there like just a word of advice, word of encouragement, just share a nugget, if you will, for our listeners?
Well, follow your dream, and don't let anybody dilute it or take it away from you. Get clarity, whether you call it a dream or a call or whatever, but get clarity on why you've been put here on earth, and abandon it, and don't let anybody take it from you. Churches are wonderful at usurping God's call. Just, don't let that happen. I deal with too many pastors, Errol, who reach the age of 50, 55, who look back over their ministry and are so disappointed it makes them cry.
Wow.
Because they didn't do what God called them to do. They did what their churches wanted them to do. And that, to me, is evil. It's just downright usurping the power of God, and that's not good. So that's the best piece of advice I can ever give to anybody.
Well, don't do what your church wants you to do what God calls you to do. Awesome. That's fantastic, Bill. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real honor in hearing your story and your journey, the lessons learned along the way. Thank you so much, man.
No, you're welcome, Errol. Enjoyed it. I hope it helps somebody grow the kingdom.
Thank you for joining the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast today. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. I hope you were inspired, you were lifted, you were encouraged. Hey, please remember to go to the iTunes page and subscribe right there, or check out the show notes from today's show at www.errollawson.com/podcast. And please share with your friends. Let somebody else be inspired. Thank you for listening. See you next week.